or dead. My woman cry continually for him. I still fumigate the pipe, and say, 'What was your son's name, and where served he? Perhaps I may know him.' His name was Karl Mayer, and he served in ze Austrian Jägers." "He were of pig stature, ant a handsome man like yourself," puts in Mariechen. I say, "I know your Karl." "Amalia," exclaimed my Vater, "come here. Here is young man which knows our Karl." And my dear Mutter comes out from a back door. I knew her directly. "You know our Karl?" says she, and looks at me, and white all over trembles. "Yes, I have seen him," I says, without ze courage to look at her, for my heart did almost burst. "My Karl is alive?" she cry. "Zen tank Got! Vere is he, my Karl? I would die in peace if I could see him once more, my darling son. But Got will not haf it so." Then she cried, and I could no longer stant it. "Darling Mamma," I say, "I am your son. I am your Karl." And she fell into my arms. Karl Ivanitch covered his eyes, and his lips were quivering. "Mutter," sagte ich bin ihr Sohn, ich bin ihr Karl, und sie stürzte mir in die Arme," he repeated, recovering a little, and wiping the tears from his eyes. But Gott did not wish me to finish my days in my own town. I were pursuet by fate. I lived in my own town only 3 months. One Suntay I sit in a coffee-house, and trinket 1 pint of beer, and fumigated my pipe, and speaket with some friends of politic, of the Emperor Franz, of Napoleon, of the war, and anybody might say his opinion. But next to us sits a strange gentleman in a grey Uberrock, who drink coffee, fumigate the pipe, and says nossing. Ven the night watchman shouted 10 o'clock, I taked my hat, paid ze money, and go home. At ze middle of ze night some one knock at ze door. I rise and says, "Who is there?" "Open," says some one. I shout again, "First say who is there, and I will open." "Open in the name of the law," say some one behind the door. I now do so. 2 Soldaten with guns stand at the door, and into the room steps the man in the grey Uberrock, who had sat with us in the coffee-house. He were Spion. "Come with me," says the Spion. "Very gut," I say. I dressed myself in boots, trousers, and coat, and go through the room. Ven I come to the wall where my gun hangs, I take it, and says, "You are a Spion, so defend you." I give 1 stroke left, 1 right, and 1 on the head. The Spion lay precipitated on the floor. Then I taked my cloak-bag and money, and jumped out of the window. I went to Ems, where I was acquainted with one General Sasin, who loved me, gived me a passport from the embassy, and taked me to Russland to learn his children. When General Sasin died, your mamma called for me and says, "Karl Ivanitch, I give you my children. Love them, and I will never leave you, and will take care of your old age." Now she is dead, and all is forgotten. For my 20 year full of service, I must now go into the street and seek for a dry crust of bread for my old age. God sees all this, and knows all this. His holy will be done. Only, I yearn for you, my children. And Karl drew me to him and kissed me on the forehead. Chapter 11. 1 mark only. The year of mourning over, Grandmamma recovered a little from her grief and once more took to receiving occasional guests, especially children of the same age as ourselves. On the 13th of December, Lubotshka's birthday, the Princess Kornakoff and her daughters, with Madame Valakhin, Stonetchka, Ilinka Grap, and the 2 younger twins, arrived at our house before luncheon. Though we could hear the sounds of talking, laughter, and movements going on in the drawing-room, we could not join the party until our morning lessons were finished. The table of studies in the schoolroom said, "Lundi, de 2 à 3 maîtres d'histoire et de géographie," and this infernal maître d'histoire we must await, listen to, and see the back of before we could gain our liberty. Already it was 20 minutes past 2, and nothing was to be heard of the tutor. nor yet anything to be seen of him in the street, although I kept looking up and down it with the greatest impatience and with an emphatic longing never to see the maître again. "I believe he is not coming to-day," said Woloda, looking up for a moment from his lesson-book. "I hope he is not, please the Lord," I answered, but in a despondent tone. "Yet there he does come, I believe, all the same." "Not he! Why, that is a gentleman," said Woloda, likewise looking out of the window. "Let us wait till 2:30, and then ask St. Jerome if we may put away our books." "Yes, and wish them au revoir," I added, stretching my arms, with the book clasped in my hands, over my head. Having hitherto idled away my time, I now opened the book at the place where the lesson was to begin, and started to learn it. It was long and difficult, and, moreover, I was in the mood when one's thoughts refuse to be arrested by anything at all. Consequently, I made no progress. After our last lesson in history, which always seemed to me a peculiarly arduous and wearisome subject, the history master had complained to St. Jerome of me because only 2 good marks stood to my credit in the register, a very small total. St. Jerome had then told me that if I failed to gain less than 3 marks at the next lesson, I should be severely punished. The next lesson was now imminent, and I confess that I felt a little nervous. So absorbed, however, did I become in my reading, that the sound of goloshes being taken off in the ante-room came upon me almost as a shock. I had just time to look up when there appeared in the doorway the servile and, to me, very disgusting face and form of the master, clad in a blue frock-coat with brass buttons. Slowly he set down his hat and books and adjusted the folds of his coat, as though such a thing were necessary, and seated himself in his place. "Well, gentlemen," he said, rubbing his hands, "let us first of all repeat the general contents of the last lesson, after which I will proceed to narrate the succeeding events of the Middle Ages." This meant, "Say over the last lesson." While Woloda was answering the master with the entire ease and confidence which come of knowing a subject well, I went aimlessly out onto the landing, and since I was not allowed to go downstairs, what more natural than that I should involuntarily turn towards the alcove on the landing? Yet before I had time to establish myself in my usual coign of vantage behind the door, I found myself pounced upon by Mimi, always the cause of my misfortunes. "You here?" she said, looking severely, first at myself and then at the maidservant's door, and then at myself again. I felt thoroughly guilty, firstly because I was not in the schoolroom, and secondly because I was in a forbidden place. So I remained silent, and, dropping my head, assumed a touching expression of contrition. "Indeed, this is too bad," Mimi went on. "What are you doing here?" Still I said nothing. "Well, it shall not rest where it is," she added, tapping the banister with her yellow fingers. "I shall inform the Countess." It was 5 minutes to 3 when I re-entered the schoolroom. The master, as though oblivious of my presence or absence, was explaining the new lesson to Woloda. When he had finished doing this, and had put his books together, while Woloda went into the other room to fetch his ticket, the comforting idea occurred to me that perhaps the whole thing was over now, and that the master had forgotten me. But suddenly he turned in my direction with a malicious smile, and said as he rubbed his hands anew, "I hope you have learnt your lesson?" "Yes," I replied. "Would you be so kind, then, as to tell me something about St. Louis's Crusade?" he went on, balancing himself on his chair and looking gravely at his feet. "Firstly, tell me something about the reasons which induced the French king to assume the cross." Here he raised his eyebrows and pointed to the inkstand. "Then explain to me the general characteristics of the Crusade." Here he made a sweeping gesture with his hand, as though to seize hold of something with it. "And lastly, expound to me the influence of this Crusade upon the European states in general," drawing the copybooks to the left side of the table, "and upon the French state in particular," drawing one of them to the right and inclining his head in the same direction. I swallowed a few times, coughed, bent forward, and was silent. Then, taking a pen from the table, I began to pick it to pieces, yet still said nothing. "Allow me the pen. I shall want it," said the master. "Well?" "Louis the Saint was a very good and wise king." "What?" "King. He took it into his head to go to Jerusalem, and handed over the reins of government to his mother." "What was her name?"